The Empire Swordsmen. Blades in hand, they thrive in melee at the heart of battle. Empire Swordsmen are some of the most common basic line infantry fielded by the Empire. Swordsmen are expert fencers, equipped with a standard sword and shield and fighting in a loose formation, allowing them to maneuver in close combat. These daring soldiers are often romanticized by imperial poets as tall, dashing figures, often bravely engaging the best enemy regiments with only their bravery and combat skill, striking an opponent's weak spots while knowing how to defend themselves with their battle-worn shields. This, along with their tremendous skill with the sword and their flexible formation, makes them a tough challenge for even the most skilled opponents, providing the Empire with powerful offensive capability. Truly professional soldiers, swordsmen form the rock of many imperial battle lines. Soldiers wear highly ornamental half-plate armor that bears the emblem of the Empire, their province, and other personal accessories and talismans. With the Empire housing many of the finest fencing schools within the old world, many have regarded the Empire as having some of the best swordsmen in all of the human kingdoms, and some say that they are even better than the fearsome swordsmen of distant Estalia. Next, the Empire Halberdier. The Empire has a history of facing many foes physically superior to even the strongest humanity has to offer. Even the strongest man may be out-muscled by an orc, while a minotaur's axe may cleave a swordsman before he ever draws close enough to swing his return blow. Similarly, mankind has often been outnumbered by teeming swarms of foes. Against these enemies, the Empire uses not only fortifications and choke points, but weapons useful in such spaces. Both of these problems have found a common solution in the Imperial Halberdier. Equipped with a fearsome halberd, a long-shafted weapon with a heavy blade and spiked tip, this weapon is capable of smashing through heavy armor and the tough hides of deadly creatures in equal measure. Halberdier regiments are amongst the most numerous infantry type due to the Emperor's requirement that each elector count maintain a standing force of halberdiers because of their strength and versatility on the battlefield. Wearing only a chest plate, these men go to combat without a shield and bravely engage their enemies in a tight formation, using the powerful swipes of their blade to compensate for their lack of armor with bone-crushing force. Such troops are suited for both defense and offense, capable of holding ground in a narrow passage against numerically or physically superior opponents, as well as being the spearhead of a massive imperial assault. As such, these men are a very common sight on any imperial battlefield. The Empire Spearman. The spear is a weapon older than mankind. It is easy to use and requires little training, but is an effective weapon nonetheless. Cheap to produce, easy to use, and especially lethal in large units, it is no surprise that the Empire's spearmen are a common sight among imperial armies. Equipped with a cheaply manufactured spear, a formation of spearmen makes an excellent defensive unit. Those who charge a well-formed unit of spears are faced with an impassable wall of sharp steel points, providing an anvil for the Imperial army, whilst the hammer strikes the killing blow. With their long reach, each rank of spearmen are able to strike at their enemy, even when they themselves are not within the front ranks. Spearmen are more common in the northern provinces due to the cheapness of the spear's manufacture and the lack of large-scale industry to field and maintain comparatively more expensive troops like the Empire Halberdiers and Handgunners. In the southern provinces, the longer and heavier pikes are preferred for being ideal in defensive and offensive situations, due to the influence of distant Alia and their preference for pikes. Nevertheless, spearmen regiments are still a common sight amongst the battlefields of the Empire, especially campaigns situated within the north. The Free Company Militia. They might look like an undisciplined rabble to you, Sergeant, but a man fights twice as hard when he's defending home and earth. Free Company Militia is a term that describes the men and women from neighboring towns or villages that have taken up arms, willingly or not, to serve alongside the armies of the Empire and defend the lands of their birth. Whilst the mainstay of the Imperial Army consists entirely of professional soldiers like swordsmen, halberdiers, and spearmen, its armies are often bulked up by a large portion of Free Company regiments. Some of these regiments consist of mercenaries, but much of it consists of local militias and levied servicemen to fight as a support unit should the need for quantity over quality be required. Many, if not all, of these militias are outfitted with a motley variety of weaponry and armor that are more often than not provided by the individuals themselves. On rare occasions, some of these militia groups consist of retired grizzly veterans who have left the military and settled down in a peaceful life many years ago, and it is their wisdom and courage that has held many militia regiments together. Most of the time, however, these regiments consist of inexperienced villagers with little to no combat training, and can only be readily identified by only a few scraps of tatty clothing, which may sometimes have a resemblance of a uniform of some kind, and often incorporate elements of the state's official colors. Equipped with mostly makeshift armor and weapons, which will include assortments such as bows, spears, swords, clubs, and particularly in rural communities, simple farming equipment like pitchforks or grain skiffs. These militias are often looked upon with distaste by many Empire generals, and seldom use them in the battlefield. Though their lack of conviction for a cause can be questionable, especially during a campaign that these men have little to no business in being in, when the armies of the Empire's foes invade the lands of the Empire, their lack of conviction can grow into zealous devotion in their efforts to ensure that their homes and families shall not suffer a horrifying fate. The Empire Handgunner. Never forget that behind the sights of a gun, there lies a man. He must be trained to use his weapon, just as he would a pike, a broadsword, or a loom. The tools of war are dangerous and fragile things, and black powder makes them more so. The mastery must be taught slowly. Repeat the lessons, and repeat them again. Once on the battlefield, it will be too late for further schooling. If they enter the battle not knowing how to kill, all they will learn is how to be killed. From Heinz Karl Frohmann, Chief Instructor, Sterland State Gunnery School. Handgunners are among the deadliest ranged infantry within the Imperial Army. These state troops are armed with fearsome long-barreled black powder weapons known as handguns, often manufactured by the highly skilled gunsmiths of Nurn. The withering volley of high-velocity lead shot from ranks of handgunners can break the most determined orc warg, or unhorse even a heavily armored Chaos Knight. Handgunners are primarily equipped with handguns, as their name suggests. These long-barrel weapons fire single lead balls at high velocity via a black powder explosion. A shot from a handgun is more powerful than an equivalent arrow, and can penetrate armor with ease. However, handguns are somewhat temperamental, and more crucially, require a lengthy reloading drill compared to that of a bowman or crossbowman. Additionally, handgunners must carry black powder on their person, making their duty somewhat more hazardous than that of a less advanced troop. Despite this, handgunners are powerful and effective soldiers, capable of crushing enemy onslaughts. Their modernized way of warfare paves the way for more advanced weapons technology. The Empire Archers. The ability to shoot several arrows per minute means that archers are still far more efficient than more technically advanced skirmish troops. Empire archers have been used in Empire armies since time immemorial. Units of archers are often irregular bands of hunters and trappers that band together to form their own regiments of scouts and support units, and are ready to answer the call to arms at any given time. The northern provinces of the Empire are famous for their bowmen and tend to have a high proportion of archers in their armies, with Hochland having the most celebrated archers of all. Archers are adaptable troops and often fight in a loose skirmish screen, falling back into Imperial ranks when the enemy approaches. Alternatively, archers can also form up into wedge formations, flanked by blocks of infantry, or else are put on rises behind the main battle line. Recently, archers have faced competition from other missile units, such as crossbowmen and handgunners. However, archers still have the advantage of rate of fire. An archer may be able to shoot 6 arrows per minute, while a crossbowman can only fire 1. The greatest archers often form into regiments of elite skirmishers, known as huntsmen. The Empire Crossbowmen. Crossbowmen are an uncommon form of ranged infantry fielded within the armies of the Empire. Crossbows are not very popular in the Empire, though Talian mercenaries are often recruited to augment the firepower of a count's army. Some counts from the southern provinces retain units of crossbowmen as part of their personal household troops. Crossbows may lack the penetrative power of handguns or the rate of fire of standard bows, but they are just as accurate in the hands of an expert. Crossbows have a range longer than that of handguns, but shorter than that of bows. Their main advantage lies in the fact that they are easily produced, and their use is easily learned. The Empire Greatsword. Despite the horrific casualties and many wounds that they suffered during the battle, the great swords fought on resolutely, and by battle's end, their white Reich Guard uniforms had been drenched in blood. The Karabor Greatswords during the Siege of Karabor. Empire Greatswords form an elite corps of heavily armored infantry who are promoted from the ranks of the Imperial Army for their exceptional skill, bravery, and courage on the battlefield. The Elector Counts always have a regiment of these troops with them at all times, for they act both as a bodyguard regiment and as a reserve force of elite warriors that has the potential to turn the tide of many battles. A regiment of great swords is amongst one of the greatest and most expensive assets within any Imperial army. These men are decked out with extremely expensive dwarf-forged full-plate armor, and are armed with massive, two-handed swords called Zweihanders, weapons so powerful that they have the potential to cleave a fully armored knight in two. Due to their expensive equipment and years of irreplaceable training, Empire generals are very hesitant to send these troops into battle. It is only when the entire battle hangs in the balance will these mighty warriors be sent in their droves towards the enemy ranks. However, due to upholding their duties, most great sword regiments are generally used as guards and garrison troops for important castles and fortresses belonging to the Elector Count, and would follow him on many state affairs. On some occasions, the Elector Count would select a champion to lead his great swords into battle. Such an honor is reserved for only the greatest warrior within the regiment. A soldier who is promoted to the ranks of the great swords is required to swear an oath to never step backwards in the face of the enemy. Every great sword regiment upholds this sacred oath, lest they suffer dire punishment, not only to their honor, but also from their own Elector Count. Fortunately, instances of great swords retreating are very rare, and accounts of great swords fighting against impossible odds, even to the last man, are far more common. As a result of their unshakable courage and devotion, great sword troops are often rewarded with double the pay of regular Imperial soldiers, fed the best foods available, and quartered in the most luxurious barracks within the castle walls. Great swords who possess even more courage and heroism than their own comrades are bestowed the greatest honor any Imperial soldier can hope to obtain: knighthood. Such an occasion is extremely rare, however. a knighted greatsword will possess his own estate and, should he wish, be allowed to join one of the famous knightly orders. And to end things off, the Flagellants. Does our most holy father reward those who take the easy road? Does he traffic in temptation? Of course not. Sigma rewards hard work, resolve in the face of temptation, and above all, courage when confronting mortal danger. My friends, the easy path leads to corruption, to damnation, to perdition. Only through suffering can you ever see the glory that is the truth, that is the founder of our glorious empire, that is our divine father, Sigma. From Rolf von Stolden, a Flagellant. Flagellants are the names given to those that have lost all hope for a dying world, and now wander the lands in marauding hordes, preaching the end is nigh, and fighting the darkness with a fervor that borders onto insanity. The Empire is a dangerous and cruel place. Wars, plagues, and the predation of terrible monsters can destroy whole towns and force their inhabitants to become beggars, vagabonds, and brigands. Most who endure such hardships are hardened by their losses, but some are driven over the edge by their suffering. Many of these disheveled wretches see their plight as a morbid sign that the Empire is about to collapse, an irrefutable portent that these are the last desperate days of a dying world. These men revel in their despair, yet they see that the only true way of salvation now is to fight and die in the defense of their gods. Such unfortunates flock like moths to a flame to hear the despairing speeches of lunatic doomsayers, and in their desperation they join these penniless zealots in their rants about lost hope and the end of the world. Led by a prophet of doom, these deluded bands of flagellants roam the Empire at will, spreading their gospel of desolation before them. It is a common sight to see groups of fanatical madmen whipping and beating themselves as they travel from village to village, begging for scraps of food as they preach their nightmarish vision of ruin. However, the occasional flagellant prefers to travel alone. When word reaches the flagellants that a battle is brewing, they gather together in anticipation for the end, believing it to be the final hopeful battle between good and evil. Thus, as armies clash, the flagellants throw themselves into the fray in desperate gestures of self-sacrifice and repentance. Although they are mad, flagellants are not cowards. They firmly believe that the end of the world is about to come, and their conviction gives them a courage that borders upon insanity. Indeed, for many are completely fearless, having long since confronted their own vision of the world's ending. Nothing holds terror for them any longer. Their madness gives them the ability to fight anything that stands before them.